They say a home is where you feel safe, but I've learned that sometimes it's also where they leave you to die. Good evening, listeners. This is Grandma's Stories. If you're here for a bedtime fairy tale, you're on the wrong channel. But if you believe that truth is sometimes darker than fiction and still worth listening to, then stay. Subscribe if you want, or don't. Just promise you'll hear this story through to the end. Someone out there might need it more than you think. It was on a Tuesday evening, of all things. Not a day anyone marks for life-changing moments. Just another dinner on a late summer night. The kind where the sun lingers a little too long, the air is too still, and everything feels more fragile than usual. In the dining room, the ceiling fan spun above 3 plates and 3 pairs of hands that didn't reach for each other anymore. Cordelia had cooked lamb, slow roasted with rosemary, the way her daughter liked, the way she always liked. But tonight, Beatrice picked at it like it had no scent at all. Across from her, Montgomery scrolled through his phone, tapping the screen with a twitch in his jaw. "You're quiet," Cordelia said. Not quite a question. Her voice was too smooth for accusation. It carried the weight of habit. Montgomery didn't look up. Beatrice sipped from her glass and said, "We've been thinking." Cordelia's fork paused mid-air. The roast smelled just right. She'd basted it 3 times, even trimmed the fat the way Beatrice used to complain about. But the room was wrong. Montgomery finally spoke. 3 people in this house. It's a little crowded, don't you think? Cordelia looked at him, then at her daughter. "It's been working," she said carefully. "We manage." "Barely," Beatrice answered. Her voice had that old teenage sharpness again, the one that used to slam doors and vanish for days at a time. "You've had a good run, Mother. But maybe it's time to simplify." Cordelia smiled. It was a grandmother's smile. Polite, thin, empty. "I pay the bills. The deed is mine." Montgomery chuckled. "And we're grateful. We just think, maybe there's a better setup, for all of us." That night, Cordelia went to bed with a heavy breath and a light head. Maybe it was the wine. Or maybe it was the way Beatrice had kissed her cheek cold dry, with her eyes still open. She slept hard. Too hard. When she woke, the air was wrong, heavy, damp, a hum in the walls. It smelled like concrete dust and mildew and something else she couldn't name. She tried to sit up but hit her head. The ceiling was less than 3 feet above her. She blinked, turned her head. No light, just a flicker from the far wall. Her body knew before her brain did. This was not her bedroom. This was not a room at all. It was a space. Tight. Hollow. Her fingers scrambled along the surface beneath her cold stone, ridged cement. Her palms stung. There was a blanket, a pillow, a single jug of water, and a note, folded in half, balanced neatly on top of a plate. She crawled toward it, limbs screaming, breath catching. It read, "Please don't fight this. You won't be here long. Just rest." It wasn't signed, but she didn't need a name. The handwriting was Beatrice's. At first, she laughed, a short, sharp, broken kind of laugh. Then she screamed, over and over, until her voice splintered and her lungs shrank. She slammed the wall with her fists, called out their names, begged, cursed, whispered, cried. No one answered. Only the quiet, only her pulse, only the sound of her own disbelief, thickening into something more permanent. And that's where it begins, dear listener. In a sealed space, with a mother's voice swallowed by bricks and lies. But trust me, she doesn't stay buried. Not for long. There was no clock in the darkness, no ticking, no chime. Only her heartbeat and the occasional sound of water shifting inside the jug when she moved too fast. Time collapsed. It melted into itself like wax. And for Cordelia, the difference between a minute and an hour was measured by how long she could keep from screaming again. She had screamed the first day, until her throat gave out, until her fists bled, until the walls echoed with nothing but her own voice fading back into her chest. When silence returned, it wasn't peace, it was punishment. She drank the water. She didn't touch the food. Not at first. The room, if it could be called that, was no more than 6 feet long, maybe 4 wide. She couldn't stand, couldn't stretch. The low ceiling forced her to curl her body like a child hiding from thunder. There was a bulb somewhere, faint and flickering, casting yellow light that felt like old urine. It buzzed, occasionally dimmed, but never fully went out. She counted the bricks in front of her, 21 across, 10 high. It became a ritual, something to grip her mind before it unraveled. By the third day, if it was the third, she began to whisper. Not to anyone, not for help, just sounds, names, pieces of songs she'd sung to her daughter when she was little. Her voice cracked like old wood, but it reminded her she was real, that she wasn't yet gone. Beatrice had been a quiet baby. Cordelia remembered that, a silence that used to feel like serenity. Now, she wondered if it had been warning all along. There was no reason for this, no sign. One day, they were sharing meals. The next, she was underground, not metaphorically, not figuratively, literally buried alive. She tried to trace it back. Had she said something, refused something? The inheritance papers were signed long ago, back when she still believed loyalty meant safety, when she believed blood meant something. Cordelia closed her eyes. It didn't matter now. Survival was no longer a vague idea. It was the only thing. Her body was old, yes, but her will wasn't. It flared now in small, stubborn sparks. Her mother had raised her on hard bread and harder truths. One of them came back now, sharp and clear. You are not dead until you stop choosing to live. So she chose. She ate the food, slowly, carefully. She sipped the water. She stopped begging. Instead, she listened. Late at night, or what felt like night, she heard footsteps above. A soft creak in the wood. Once, she heard laughter. Once, a toilet flush. Ordinary sounds from the people who had decided she no longer mattered. She pressed her ear to the wall, trying to catch voices. Once, she thought she heard her name. Not with love. Not even with regret. Just a sound. A mention. She said it back to herself. Cordelia. Then louder. Cordelia May Hart. As if anchoring herself to a name could prevent her from disappearing completely. But names don't save you. She knew that now. Still, she said it every day. One afternoon or night, something new happened. She heard footsteps, not above, but to the side. Then silence. Then 3 taps. Deliberate. Soft. Then nothing. She froze. Was it the house settling? Was it rats? Or was someone else here? She waited, heart pounding. Then, gathering what little strength she had, she tapped back. 3 knocks. Slow. Even. She pressed her ear to the wall again. Silence. Then, the faintest sound, like a breath. She whispered. Hello? Nothing. She whispered again. Please. Is someone there? No answer. Only the humming of the bulb and her pulse in her throat. But now, there was something else. A shift. She wasn't entirely alone. Or at least, she couldn't be sure anymore. And that was enough. That tiny crack in the certainty of her isolation, just wide enough for hope to sneak in. It wasn't a rescue. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Later, curled under the scratchy blanket, she mouthed the word again. Hope. Goo. She hadn't said it in years. It felt unfamiliar. But not impossible. That night, she didn't cry. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because something deep inside her, something buried even deeper than the room she was trapped in, had started to stir. It didn't speak yet. But it was watching. Waiting. And it wanted out. As she closed her eyes, she heard it, the faint clink of a tool hitting stone. And she smiled. Not out of relief, but out of certainty. Someone was coming. The first blow came like a thunderclap. A sudden crack in the stillness. Cordelia flinched, heart leaping to her throat. The sound echoed through the narrow space, then settled into her bones like a promise. He was digging. She could hear the scrape of metal against concrete, the soft grunt of effort, the occasional pause as he adjusted his stance. It wasn't steady work, it came in bursts, like a man testing his limits, then retreating to breathe. But each strike brought her closer to air, to light, to the world that had forgotten her. Cordelia lay there, her face turned to the sound, eyes wide though the dim bulb flickered low above her. She said nothing. Ezekiel had asked for silence while he worked, and she gave it. But her mind raced. She imagined him. An old man, she could tell by the voice maybe, with hands like her late husband's, rough and patient. She pictured him in a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled, sweat beading at his temple. Not out of romance, out of gratitude, out of awe. What kind of person breaks a wall for a stranger? Time passed strangely. She measured it by the number of sounds, the chipping, the dragging, the way he'd occasionally whisper words under his breath she couldn't make out. Then it would go quiet again, and she'd wonder if he'd left, if he'd changed his mind, if they'd found him. But always the sound would return, and each time she pressed her palms against the wall, just to feel the vibration. It was a heartbeat now, a rhythm she clung to. She didn't sleep, couldn't, not while freedom was clawing its way toward her. Her thoughts drifted. She remembered teaching Beatrice how to ride a bike. Her daughter's arms were thin, knobby, always bruised from trees and bad turns. Cordelia would run beside her, shouting encouragement, afraid to let go. When she finally did, Beatrice looked back once, eyes wide with fear, then delight. Where had that girl gone? Cordelia wanted to hate her, needed to, maybe. But her heart refused to obey. It held the love like a splinter, deep and stubborn. The sounds outside paused. Then Ezekiel's voice came through. "I can feel the hollow. It's close." Cordelia crawled toward the voice, pressed her lips near the space between two bricks. "I'm still here." He chuckled softly. "I wasn't sure you'd still believe in me." "I don't believe in much anymore," she said. "But I believe in sound. And you keep making it." There was silence again, but not empty. She heard him shift, then speak again. "Do you know why they did it?" Cordelia hesitated, then answered, "Not really. Maybe it was easier than watching me grow old. Or maybe they thought I had nothing left to give." "That's a lie," he said quickly. It was the first time someone had defended her without asking for details. "Do you have family?" she asked. "Had," he replied. "A wife, a son. They're both gone now." She didn't press. Grief doesn't need questions. It needs space. The work resumed. Hours passed. Or days. The food ran out. The water was low. Cordelia's voice grew hoarser. Her body, frailer. But her mind remained sharp. Sharper than it had in years. The darkness, once a cage, had become her teacher. She had learned how to listen, how to wait, how to survive. Late one night, she awoke to the sound of brick cracking. Not a tap, a break, a burst. Dust fell into her lap. She crawled forward, coughing as particles filled the air. Then light. Not much, just a pinhole. But it was different. Clean, white. "Cordelia!" Ezekiel's voice was louder now. Closer. She wept. Not sobs. Just tears, silent and warm, washing down her cheeks like rain after drought. "I see you," he said. "Through the hole. Your eyes." "I'm here," she said. "I need one more night. The wall is old, but stubborn. Like you, I think." She laughed. For the first time in weeks, she laughed. "Then you'd better not give up now." He didn't. She leaned against the bricks, watching the speck of light grow wider. She didn't speak. She didn't dream. She only waited. For breath. For touch. For life again. And as the wall began to fall away brick by brick, breath by breath, she knew. She would never be buried again. Not in silence. Not in fear. Not in someone else's story. The final blow was quieter than she expected. A dull thud. A soft crumble. Then the sudden shift of air brushing her skin like a whisper. She didn't move at first. She simply stared at the opening, no bigger than a loaf of bread, carved clean into the wall that had kept her from the world for what felt like forever. Then, she heard his voice again. Not from a distance this time. It was close. Right there. "Cordelia." She crawled forward slowly, muscles aching from disuse, her hands trembling over the dirt-caked floor. When her face reached the opening, she stopped. Her eyes adjusted to the light coming through, dim and warm. Not bright like sunlight, but softer, filtered by a single hanging bulb in what looked like an unfinished crawlspace. And there he was. Ezekiel, kneeling, covered in sweat and grime, a chisel in one hand, a flashlight propped on the ground beside him. His eyes met hers, and for a second, they didn't speak, didn't smile, just breathed. "Move back a little," he said gently. "I'll open it wider." She did, folding herself into the blanket, knees drawn to chest, listening as the sound of brick giving way grew louder, faster. Bits of cement rained over her arms and feet, and still she waited, still and steady. She wasn't afraid now, not anymore. When the hole was finally wide enough, Ezekiel reached through. "Give me your hand," quote. Cordelia stared at it. Weathered, veined, calloused like her late husband's once were. She placed her hand into his, and he gripped it with surprising strength. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she said, smiling faintly. "But go ahead." With a firm pull and a stifled groan, he guided her through. Her body scraped the sides, knees burning, shoulders twisting to fit. It wasn't graceful. Nothing about it was. But after a final shove and a held breath, she collapsed onto the dusty floor of his basement, panting. She lay there, unmoving, eyes closed, the cold concrete beneath her oddly comforting. A different kind of prison, but this one had an exit. Ezekiel hovered, unsure whether to help her sit up. She looked so thin, her face sunken and pale, her lips cracked, hair knotted. He knelt beside her, placing a folded towel under her head. "I've got water upstairs, clean clothes, soup maybe," quote. She chuckled weakly. "If it's not in a metal bowl, I'll eat anything." He helped her into a seated position. She winced but didn't cry out. Her back ached. Her knees cracked. But every part of her pain was a kind of proof she had made it out. He brought a blanket from the couch and draped it over her shoulders. "I'm not calling the police," he said, softly but firmly. Cordelia looked at him. "Not yet," he added, "unless you want me to." "I don't," she said, her voice hoarse. "They'd ask questions I'm not ready to answer." He nodded. "That's your choice." They sat in silence. She looked around the space his basement. Stacks of old newspapers, a dusty piano missing keys, shelves lined with tools. It smelled of cedar and old winters. "I never thought I'd see this again," she said. "What?" "Air. Walls that don't close in. The sound of a voice that doesn't lie." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just listened. She appreciated that more than any words. "I should hate them," she said after a moment. "You don't?" "I did. For the first few days, or weeks, whatever time meant down there, I hated them for forgetting I existed. But after a while, I started hating myself. For raising her. For trusting her. For being too proud to notice what she'd become." Ezekiel leaned back against the wall. "You shouldn't carry that," he said. "Too late, it's in my bones." She paused. "Do you know the worst part?" He looked at her. "I still love her. Somewhere in this rotting chest, I do. Not because she deserves it, but because I don't know how not to." He understood. Maybe not fully, but enough. She shifted, pulling the blanket tighter. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head. "You saved yourself. I just happened to hear it." "No," she replied. "You believed it. That mattered more." He stood. "Let's get you upstairs." "I don't think I can walk." "I'll help." He held out his arm. Slowly, she leaned into him, rising inch by inch, weightless in her weakness but grounded by his presence. They climbed the stairs together, one careful step at a time. The upstairs air hit her like spring after a cruel winter. Warmer, brighter. The room was small kitchen to the left, living room to the right, a hallway leading to a single bedroom. Simple. Clean. He guided her to a chair at the table. She sat down slowly, eyes scanning the space like someone seeing the world for the first time. Ezekiel moved quickly. A glass of water. A warm cloth. A bowl of soup reheated on the stove. She ate with slow, careful motions, savoring every bite as though it were sacred. When she finished, she looked up at him. "I don't know who I am anymore." He sat across from her. "Then let's find out together." And with that, silence returned. But this time it was full. Alive. A silence of peace. A silence that said, "You're safe now. At least for today." The first night above ground, Cordelia didn't sleep. Not because she was afraid, but because her body had forgotten how to rest without listening for footsteps. She lay on Ezekiel's old sofa, a patchwork quilt pulled to her chest, her eyes fixed on the ceiling fan above her. It spun slowly, humming a lullaby she didn't trust yet. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of a clock on the far wall and the occasional creak of wood adjusting to the drop in temperature. Sleep, she learned, wasn't just a matter of exhaustion. It required safety. And safety had to be earned, not assumed. In the morning, sunlight seeped through the half-closed blinds. A golden line cut across the floor, climbing up her legs like a slow-moving flame. She sat up, legs stiff, back sore, joints complaining. Still, she stood. Ezekiel had left a note on the table. "Gone to the store. Don't open the door. You're safe. E." She held the paper for a long time, fingers tracing the curve of his handwriting. Simple, unadorned, honest. She made her way to the bathroom. The mirror greeted her like a stranger. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Gaunt cheeks. Pale skin. Lips drawn thin. Her hair, once neatly brushed and pinned, now hung in wiry tangles. Her eyes, though her eyes were the same. Worn, yes, but alive. She turned on the tap and watched the water run. She dreamed of this clean water, running freely. She washed her hands, then her face, then her arms. The cold bit into her skin, but she didn't flinch. It was real. She was real, still here. When Ezekiel returned, he brought groceries: oatmeal, milk, fruit, a new bar of soap, a pack of white undershirts. Nothing fancy, everything useful. "You didn't need to," she said, eyeing the bags. He shrugged. "Didn't know your size, so I guessed. You can throw them at me if they don't fit." She smiled, a crooked, uncertain smile, the kind that hadn't seen daylight in too long. They ate breakfast in silence. He offered coffee. She declined. Caffeine made her tremble now. After the dishes were done, she sat at the window while he tinkered with a loose floorboard. Outside, children rode bicycles in crooked circles. A woman watered plants on her porch. A mail carrier waved from across the street. The world was still spinning. And somehow, she was back in it. But she didn't feel like she belonged. "I need a name," she said suddenly. Ezekiel looked up from the floor. "What? If someone asks who I am, I can't be Cordelia anymore. That name's buried." He considered her words. "Iris," she said, answering her own question. "That was my mother's name. And flowers always return, even after winter." He nodded slowly. "Iris," he repeated. "Nice to meet you." She smiled again, this time deeper. They agreed that she would stay out of sight for a while. No police, no lawyers, no noise. Not yet. Ezekiel had no visitors, no family. The house was quiet, tucked behind tall trees, a place where time passed softly. She slept more that second night. Not well, but enough. In the morning she walked circles through the living room, stretching her limbs, coaxing her muscles awake. By the third day she could stand without wobbling. She ate more, talked more, and little by little, her voice came back, not just her volume, but her tone, her rhythm, her presence. Ezekiel gave her a notebook. "You might want to write things down," he said. "It helps." She hesitated, then opened it. The first page stayed blank for hours. But finally she wrote, "They buried me, but they forgot I was a seed." She didn't know where that line came from, but it felt true. That evening she sat on the back porch. The air was cooler now, summer fading. The trees rustled overhead. She held a mug of warm milk between her palms. "I used to think surviving was the end of the story," she said aloud. Ezekiel looked up from his chair. "But it's not," she continued. "It's the first chapter. The hard part is deciding what to do with the pages that come after." He didn't interrupt. She looked out toward the fence, where ivy crept along the wood in tangled silence. "I want to take something back," she said. "Not everything, just one thing." Quote, "Like what?" "My name, my voice, my place in the world. That's 3 things." She grinned. "Then I guess I'm greedy." He laughed, a full, deep laugh that startled a nearby squirrel into jumping from the railing. That night, she wrote again. Longer. Not a journal. A declaration. Of pain, yes, but also of return. And when she closed the notebook, she no longer felt like a ghost. She felt like someone who had survived something unspeakable, and was still speaking. It started with a hat, wide-brimmed, woven, the kind older women wore when tending tomatoes or browsing outdoor markets. Ezekiel had placed it by the door without saying a word. Next to it, a pair of dark glasses. Practical, modest, discreet. Cordelia stared at them for a long while. Then she reached for the glasses first. The sunlight outside had become something she craved and feared in equal measure. It was both invitation and interrogation. It would touch her skin, her hair, her face, mark her as alive, but it might also recognize her. Or worse, make her recognize herself in a way she wasn't yet ready to face. Still, when Ezekiel asked gently, "Walk with me today?" she nodded. They left the house just before noon, taking the long route down the back alley that curved into a quiet path through a grove of trees. No sidewalks, no traffic, just dirt and wind and the occasional bird cutting across the branches. She walked slowly, arms folded in front of her, every step measured like she was still learning the language of movement. Ezekiel kept her pace, neither leading nor following, just beside. It wasn't about the walk, it was about the choosing. She chose to walk. Halfway through, they paused at a wooden bench overlooking a pond barely wider than a parking lot. Ducks bobbed lazily across the surface. Somewhere nearby, a lawnmower hummed its steady song. Cordelia pulled the hat lower. "It's strange," she said. "Being among people again. No one's looking," Ezekiel replied. "That's what scares me," she whispered. He glanced over. "I thought I'd hate being invisible. Now I'm afraid of being seen." "You don't owe anyone your story." "I know," she said. "But what if I want to tell it one day? Not for justice, not for pity, just to know it doesn't die with me." He looked out over the water. "Then write it, all of it, even the parts you want to forget." She nodded. They sat in silence again, but it was the kind that wraps around you, not the kind that cuts. When they stood to head back, Cordelia didn't need help. She moved with slow, earned confidence, and though no one on the street looked their way, she imagined her presence leaving a faint echo on the air. Back home, she brewed tea. Strong, black, unsweetened. She carried 2 mugs to the porch, where the late sun spilled over the railing. Ezekiel joined her, wiping dirt from his palms with an old rag had been in the shed most afternoons, fixing what didn't need fixing. "I bought the local paper," he said, setting it beside her. "Thought you might want to see if anyone's looking." She hesitated, then opened it. No articles, no names, no photos, just life going on as if nothing had happened. She folded the paper and handed it back. "They're not looking," she said. "Not yet. They think I'm dead." He nodded. "Let's keep it that way, at least for now." That night, she dreamt for the first time in weeks. Not of bricks or cold water or voices above the ceiling. She dreamt of her garden, roses climbing the fence, peppers ripening in the heat, Beatrice, age 5, chasing butterflies in a blue dress too big for her. Cordelia stood at the edge, watching, not joining, just watching. And for once, in the dream, her chest didn't tighten. She woke with tears drying at the corners of her eyes, but her breath was steady. The next morning, she pulled the notebook from the drawer and wrote, "Some things grow in silence, but others only bloom in light." She flipped to the back page and began sketching a rough floor plan of her old house, not from nostalgia, but from memory, from knowledge. She needed to remember every hallway, every corner, every room where she had once been seen. "I want to go back," she said that evening, setting the notebook on the table. Ezekiel didn't flinch. "To the house?" he asked. She nodded. "I don't mean today, or tomorrow, but one day I want to stand in that room again, not as a prisoner, as its owner." He leaned forward. "What would you do?" "I'm not sure yet," she said. "But it won't be for revenge." She looked him in the eyes. "I don't want to destroy them. I want to outlive what they tried to do." He sat back in his chair, let out a slow breath. "Then we'll make a plan," he said. "And start with something small." Quote. She tilted her head. "Like what?" He smiled. "Let's paint your room." She blinked, then laughed. "My room?" "Yeah. The guest room. The one with the peeling wallpaper. You're not just visiting, you know. You're staying." Something shifted in her chest. Not shock. Not fear. But the strange, blooming warmth of being claimed. It wasn't romantic. It was sanctuary. And as they stood side by side that night, rolling color onto cracked walls, she realized something important. The past could not be painted over, but it could be outgrown. One layer at a time. The first wall she painted was lavender, not by design, The hardware store had a discount section in the back, half empty cans, mismatched colors, returns from customers who changed their minds. Ezekiel had pointed at the muted purple and said, "Close enough to dignity." She liked that. Dignity wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It lived in the quiet colors people forgot to fear. They painted together in the mornings, windows open, radio humming somewhere in the background. Iris moved slowly, hands steadier now, wrists less stiff. Each stroke of the brush felt like undoing something, not erasing the past but reclaiming it, one layer at a time. She caught Ezekiel watching her once, not with pity, but with something closer to awe, as if witnessing a seed push through soil after the frost. She didn't say anything, neither did he, but in that silence, something planted itself, respect, perhaps, or the soft beginning of trust with roots. By the third day, the room had changed. Not just in color, in air, in weight. It felt lived in. It felt harsh. That afternoon, Iris stood in the middle of the small room, barefoot, arms crossed. "I want to work," she said. Ezekiel, seated on the porch, looked up from the newspaper. "Doing what? I don't know yet. But I don't want to live on your charity." Quote, "You're not," he replied. "This is mutual survival." She shook her head. "It's kindness. And I need more than that. I need motion. Purpose." He thought for a moment, then folded the paper. "There's a bookstore 2 blocks over," he said. "Privately owned. The woman who runs it always complains about needing help organizing the back. You won't have to talk to customers, just dust and alphabetize." Iris smiled. "I can dust." He called the next morning. By the afternoon, she had an apron and a key to the back door. She started with the used fiction section. It was chaos, stacks leaning against each other like drunkards, dust thick as ash, titles she'd read years ago, titles she'd never heard of, whole lives tucked between pages, forgotten, waiting. She didn't mind the work. Her back ached, her hands dried out. But each spine she touched reminded her that someone had once created this. Ad once said, "Here. This is what I've lived through. Maybe it matters." She worked 4 hours a day, 3 days a week, quietly, anonymously. And every evening she walked home past her old street. Not close enough to be seen, just far enough to glimpse the chimney of the house she once called hers. The garden was dead now, overgrown, the gate rusted. The window she used to open in spring now sealed with plastic. She didn't hate it, but she didn't miss it either. Not in the way she thought she would. What she missed was the woman she'd been before the betrayal. But that woman was gone. And the one who replaced her, this Iris, was learning to be sharper, slower, more deliberate. She was no longer someone waiting to be chosen. She was choosing. On her 3rd week at the shop, a boy came in with his grandmother. They argued gently over a book. He wanted something about monsters. She wanted him to read something real. Iris watched from the back, pretending to dust. The grandmother reminded her of someone. Not herself, but the woman she might have become, in another version of the story. One without walls. Later that day, she wrote in her notebook, "The past is a locked door. I used to rattle the handle every night. Now I walk past it without stopping." Ezekiel asked her that evening how her day had been. "Ordinary," she said. "Sounds perfect." They ate tomato soup and grilled cheese. She talked about paper cuts and misplaced biographies. He told her about an old pocket watch he found in the shed. They didn't speak of the wall, or Beatrice, or the thing they both knew hovered just outside their shared peace. But it was there, waiting. Iris felt it in her bones. A return, a reckoning. But not yet. Not today. Today was for soup and stories and the quiet dignity of a lavender room. The trouble began with a name. Not hers, but one close enough. Iris was shelving a collection of short stories when the customer asked, "Do you have anything by C.M. Hart?" She froze. Not dramatically, not even visibly, just the way a deer freezes when a branch cracks. C.M. Hart. Cordelia May Hart. Her name. Her real one. Not printed in books, but once written on utility bills, school records, birthday cards. A name now supposedly 6 feet under. She turned slowly. The man was middle-aged, polite, holding a canvas bag of dog-eared poetry. A visitor, not local. I'm not sure, she said, careful with her tone. That name sounds familiar. Let me check. She went into the back room and stayed longer than she needed to. Ran her hands over the spines of books she'd already organized. Breathed deep. Reminded herself she was safe. That no one looking for CM Hart was expecting her to answer. When she returned, the man had left. That evening she told Ezekiel over dinner. He stirred his stew slowly, not looking up. It could be coincidence, he said. I know. Or not. I know that too. She didn't sleep well that night. Dreams returned, but they weren't of the wall. They were of voices, whispers just behind her, faces she couldn't turn to see, footsteps that always stopped when she stopped walking. In the morning, she went to work as usual. But something had shifted. At the bookstore, the owner, a kind widow named Lorraine, told her a man had asked about Iris earlier that week. Not by name, Lorraine said, pouring tea. He just asked who helps in the back. Said he thought he recognized you. Iris set her teacup down carefully. Did he leave a name? Lorraine shook her head. But he had a scar on his cheek. Looked like an old burn. Montgomery. She hadn't seen him in over 2 years. Not since the day he sealed the wall with his own hands. But the description was enough. Iris thanked Lorraine and returned to the shelves. That night, she stood in front of the mirror again. Not the one from Ezekiel's bathroom. The one in her mind. She tried to see what others might see now. A woman in her 70s, thinner than before, shorter than memory allowed, with softer lines and a steadier gaze. A survivor pretending to be ordinary. But eyes don't forget. And maybe neither do monsters. I need to move, she told Ezekiel. He nodded. We can, if that's what you want. But she didn't answer right away. She looked at the walls they'd painted, the books on the table, the potted plant by the window she watered each morning. I don't want to disappear again, she said. Not for them. He waited. I want to finish the story before they write the ending. He poured her a glass of water and placed it in front of her without a word. The next day, she walked a different route home from the shop, one that took her closer to her old street. The trees were taller now. The house looked the same, tired, gray, slightly stooped like an old man ashamed to stand fully upright. In the driveway, a car she didn't recognize. Curtains drawn. She didn't go closer. But she watched. From across the road, tucked between shadows, she saw a figure pass behind the living room window. And though she couldn't be sure it moved like her daughter, that night she opened her notebook and wrote, what if the story doesn't need to end with punishment? What if survival is the revenge? She closed the cover gently. Then she pulled out another book, an address ledger Ezekiel had found in a drawer. She flipped through it until she found one name. Jasper Hart. Her grandson. She hadn't seen him since he was 10. His face was blurred now, but the way he held her hand at church that Easter morning, she still remembered that. She tapped the page once with her finger. I think it's time I sent a letter. Ezekiel looked up from his crossword. Handwritten? Typed, she said, but signed in ink. He smiled. Then let's find a stamp. The letter was short. 3 paragraphs, typed in a serif font, carefully worded to reveal just enough but never too much. No names, no accusations, no bitterness. Just a gentle hand extended across time and blood. If this reaches the Jasper Hart, I believe it will. Please know that I am well. I hope you are too. There are things you may have been told, and others you were not. I'm not here to argue with either, only to say some stories were cut short before they could tell their truth. If you're curious, or simply need to hear the ending for yourself, I'll be sitting by the pond at Haven Park, Thursdays at 2. No pressure. No questions. No strings. Just a bench. Just me. She signed it Iris, then paused and added in cursive underneath, once known by another name. Ezekiel read it over twice, said nothing, then folded it neatly, and slid it into an envelope. We'll send it from a different zip code, he said, just to be safe. 3 days passed, then 5. Each Thursday she sat on the bench by the pond, hat pulled low, hands resting in her lap. The same ducks paddled lazy circles. Children squealed in the distance. A woman with a stroller passed by each time, nodding politely. On the second Thursday, Ezekiel came with her, seated 2 benches away, reading a newspaper upside down. I'm not nervous, she said. I am, he replied. She smiled but didn't correct him. The third Thursday, it rained. She went anyway. No one came. But she didn't leave early. Somewhere between the drops and the silence, she realized something had changed. She wasn't waiting to be saved anymore. She was holding space for herself, and maybe, for him. On the fourth Thursday, just as the bell at the nearby church struck 2, a man appeared. Tall, maybe late 20s, long coat, dark curls, nervous hands. He walked the path once, then again, slower. She didn't look up, not right away. He sat down on the opposite end of the bench. Neither spoke. They sat like that for several minutes, him staring ahead, her listening for breath patterns, for tone, for memory. Finally he said, "You write like someone who used to know me." "I did," she replied softly. "I was 10 the last time I saw you. You gave me a blue kite." "I remember," she said. "It got stuck in the tree. And you climbed up barefoot to get it. That part I forgot." He turned slightly toward her. "I'm sorry I never came looking for you. You were a child. I was told you died." She nodded. "Technically I did." He paused. "Does Mom know you're alive?" Number. Quote. "Will you tell her?" "I don't think she wants to know." Jasper looked down at his hands, twisting a ring around his finger. "I don't know what she told me," he said. "But whatever it was, it never felt finished. It always felt like a lie wrapped in politeness." Iris looked at him, saw the sharp edge of pain in his jaw. Not fresh, but unresolved. "You're not here for her," she said. "No," he admitted. "I'm here for you." She blinked, caught off guard by the directness. "I didn't think you'd come." "I almost didn't. Then I thought if someone I loved had lived through what I suspect you did and I didn't show up, what kind of man would that make me?" A slow breath filled her chest. "Do you hate her?" she asked. He was quiet for a long time. "No," he said finally. "I think I pity her. I think she was broken long before she ever broke anything." That made her heart ache. He stood. "I don't know what this is yet, but I'd like to see you again." Quote. "I'd like that too." He nodded, smiled en sesmal, hesitant, then turned and walked back the way he came. She didn't move for a long time. Didn't cry. Didn't hope too loudly. Just sat there, feeling the warmth left on the bench beside her, and the way her own name, her true name, had found its way back to life, one syllable at a time. That evening, she wrote in her notebook, "Some inherit blood. Others inherit silence. But once in a while, someone chooses to inherit truth." Jasper returned the following Thursday, this time with 2 coffees in hand and a book tucked under his arm. He sat beside her on the same bench, a little closer than before, and offered one of the cups without a word. She accepted it, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. "I wasn't sure how you took it," he said. "Black," she replied. He smiled. "I guessed right." They sipped in silence. Around them, the park was alive in its quiet way. A breeze carried the sound of far-off laughter, the creak of swings, the rustle of leaves falling too soon. Jasper pulled the book from under his arm. "I found this in the attic," he said. "It's yours. I think you forgot it when you left." He handed it to her. The cover was worn, edges frayed. Collected letters of Virginia Woolf. She ran her hand across the surface. The weight of it hit her in a place she hadn't touched in years. "I read this out loud to your mother once," she said. "She was 16. She said it was boring." "I figured." He laughed. "She preferred magazines with quizzes and perfume ads. She still does." Iris turned the pages slowly. Inside was an old receipt, yellowed and fragile, marked from a hardware store. She didn't remember why she kept it, but it stayed like all small things that cling to us for reasons we stop questioning. "Why did you really come back?" she asked, still looking at the pages. Jasper shifted in his seat. "I wanted to see if you were real, if you were whole." "I'm neither," she said plainly. "But I'm here." He nodded. "I've been asking questions," he said, quietly, carefully. "Old neighbors, a few people at the church. No one remembers a funeral, no obituary, just that you vanished." "Your mother was thorough," Iris murmured, not in grief, but in secrecy. "She said you moved to Florida." Iris blinked. "That's creative." "Yeah, and then she said you got sick, and eventually, that you didn't want contact." Each part half true, which makes it harder to challenge. He looked at her then. Long and full. "Tell me what happened," he said. Iris exhaled, slow and steady. The kind of breath that came before deep water. Not today, she said gently. Not because I won't, but because, if I open that box, I want you to be ready for what's inside. Jasper sat back. I understand. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking about other things. Small things. Books. Weather. Music. He told her he was studying architecture. She asked if he still painted. He said only when no one was looking. Before he left, he said, I don't think she knows I found you. I hope not. But she'll know something's changed. She always does. Will you tell her? Eventually. She tilted her head. And what will you say? I don't know yet. Maybe I'll ask her the same thing I asked you. Why? She touched his hand lightly. Don't ask unless you're ready to accept that some people don't know the answer, and some don't think they owe one. He didn't pull away. When he rose to go, he said, I'll come again next week. I'll be here. She watched him walk away, tall and sure, a shadow of the boy he had been but entirely his own man now. There was something healing in his stride, like watching a wound close not with stitches, but with time and air. That evening, back at Ezekiel's, she sat on the porch long after the sun had gone. He came. She said when Ezekiel joined her, I figured. He brought a book. And questions. And? He left with fewer answers but more truth. Ezekiel poured her a cup of tea and said nothing more. Later, in her notebook, she wrote, The hardest part of surviving isn't the silence. It's learning how to speak again without rage. She paused, then added, I think I'm learning. The fifth Thursday was colder. Wind cut through the trees, pulling leaves down in a slow rain of color. Iris wore her coat buttoned to the neck, hands tucked deep in the pockets. Jasper arrived with a thermos instead of coffee, and 2 tin cups wrapped in a towel to keep them warm. Mint tea, he said, with honey. She nodded approval and took a cup without speaking. They sat in their usual place, facing the pond that now mirrored a sky stripped of summer. The ducks were gone. The bench creaked when they leaned back, as if it too had grown tired of waiting. I've been thinking, Jasper began, about the truth. How it works. Iris glanced at him, letting the silence invite him to continue. People always say the truth will set you free, but I think, maybe it just gives you a different kind of cage, one you choose to sit in. Iris looked forward, eyes narrowing slightly. The truth isn't a cage, she said, but it's rarely a key either. It's more like a mirror. You don't always like what you see, but if you're brave enough to keep looking, sometimes it makes you kinder. Jasper nodded slowly, rolling the edge of his cup between his fingers. Then can I ask now? He said quietly. She knew what he meant. The question that had waited beneath every word they'd shared. She sipped her tea, felt its warmth move through her chest, and said, yes. He didn't ask for the whole story, just the beginning. She appreciated that. It started years before the wall, she said, long before concrete and silence. It began with love, not the soft kind, the desperate kind, the kind that makes you ignore small cruelties for the sake of keeping someone close. Jasper turned toward her, giving her his full attention. I raised your mother alone. Your grandfather died when she was still small. I worked nights, saved pennies in jars, did all the things women do when they don't have anyone else to lean on. Quote, she told me you were strict. I was, Iris admitted, and tired. But I was never cruel, never careless, just stretched thin. Jasper looked down. She made it sound like you abandoned her. No, Iris said softly. She abandoned me, slowly, with cold silences, with eyes that stopped looking back, and I let it happen because I believed it would pass. She paused, then continued. Then she met Montgomery. Jasper's jaw tensed. He wasn't just controlling, Iris said. He was subtle. The kind of man who poisons wells with sugar, compliments that cut, suggestions that isolate, smiles that demand something in return. Jasper didn't interrupt. His hands had stilled completely now. They convinced me I was in the way, Iris said. That my presence was a burden, and I wanted peace more than pride, so I compromised. I gave up rooms in my own house, let them paint over my decisions. One day, they asked me to sign over partial ownership to make things easier legally. I signed. Quote, Jasper exhaled sharply. I didn't think they'd use it, but they did. The day I woke up in the dark, I realized what my love had bought me. He looked at her, horror creeping across his face. They buried you alive, she nodded, with a blanket and a prayer that I'd disappear quietly. He shook his head, trying to process what didn't want to be understood. I kept thinking maybe it was an accident, he said, that maybe she thought you left, or got sick, that maybe he acted alone. Quote, she let it happen, Iris said. That's all I know. That's all I need to know. He was quiet for a long time. Then, his voice low, he asked, why didn't you tell the police? Because what they took from me isn't something a courtroom can return. And because part of me still believes she's broken in a way justice can't fix. Jasper looked away, eyes glassy. She used to hold my hand at night, he said. When I had nightmares, she held mine when she lied, Iris whispered. They sat in silence again. But this time, it wasn't emptiness. It was weight, the kind that settles into the bones and changes the shape of what comes next. I don't know what to do with this, Jasper finally said. You don't have to do anything, Iris replied. Knowing is enough, for now. He looked at her, eyes rimmed with something between grief and loyalty. I'm glad you're alive. She reached over, placed her hand on his. So am I. Quote. They sat like that until the light faded, until the wind picked up, until the bench felt too cold to carry them any longer. Before leaving, Jasper turned back to her. Same time next week? Of course. She watched him disappear down the path, her fingers still warm from his touch. That night she didn't write. She sat in her lavender room, lights dimmed, and listened to the quiet. Not the kind she'd once feared, but the kind that felt earned. And finally, she said to no one at all, I forgive myself. Then she slept without dreams. Jasper didn't sleep well after that conversation. He lay in his small apartment, surrounded by the quiet hum of city lights bleeding through the blinds, and listened to the ticking of a cheap wall clock that sounded suddenly accusatory. Time, always moving forward, felt like a weight pressing down instead of a promise pulling up. He had thought hearing the truth would bring clarity. But clarity, he learned, wasn't clean. It didn't slice pain into manageable pieces. It fogged the mirrors. It made him see his mother not just as a liar, but as someone capable of unmaking the very roots he'd come from. The next morning he skipped work. He walked the length of 2 neighborhoods without aim. At a small cafe he ordered tea but didn't drink it. In his notebook he wrote a list of everything he could remember about his mother that still felt true. The page stayed mostly blank. That night, he called her. Her voice answered quickly, familiar but suddenly foreign. Hi, sweetheart, she said. Everything okay? There was always sweetness in her tone. Manufactured, like perfume sprayed over rot. I ran into someone, he said. Someone I thought was dead. A pause. You'll have to be more specific, she replied, still playing light. I saw her, Mom. I've been seeing her. Beatrice's voice dropped half a note. I don't understand. Quote, yes, he said softly. You do. Silence. Then came the sound of a chair creaking, as if she'd sat down without meaning to. I don't know what story you've been told, she said. I've been told the truth, Jasper replied. And it didn't come from a stranger. It came from someone who remembers holding my hand. I did that too, Beatrice said, sharper now. I raised you. I protected you. Don't forget that. Jasper's throat tightened. Protected me from what? From the woman who sang to me when I had fever dreams? The one who taught me how to read a map and listen for thunder before the storm hit? She abandoned us. No, he said firmly. You buried her. There was no reply. Only breath. Uneven. Human. Afraid. I'm not calling the police, he added. She didn't ask for that. You don't understand what she was, Beatrice whispered. You never saw how cold she could be, how manipulative. Quote, no, Jasper said, voice low. I only saw a woman with tired hands who still made soup when I was sick, and I remember wondering why the house got quieter each year, why the garden died, why the lights in her room were always off. You're young, Beatrice snapped. You're being emotional. I'm being aware, he said, and that's not something I'm going to apologize for. He hung up, then sat in the silence that followed like it was a baptism. That Sunday, he drove back to Haven Park, earlier than usual. Iris was already there, seated with her notebook open, pen moving like it had a will of its own. She looked up, smiled as he approached, but the smile faded when she saw his face. What happened? She asked. I talked to her. Iris folded the notebook closed. And? She didn't deny it, he said. Not exactly, but she didn't admit it either. She won't. He looked out at the pond, then down at his hands. I thought confronting her would feel like justice, but it just feels heavier. Iris nodded. Truth doesn't lighten. It deepens. He sat beside her, quieter now. I want to do something, he said after a long pause. Not for revenge, but for her not to pretend anymore. Iris tilted her head. What would that look like? I don't know yet, he said. But it won't be loud, it'll be precise. They sat like that for a while. Then she asked, Did you tell her where I am? He shook his head. I'll never give her that. Later, over soup in Ezekiel's kitchen, Jasper asked Iris a different kind of question. What would you do if you had 1 hour with her? Just the two of you. Iris stirred her spoon slowly. I'd ask her what broke her, not to excuse it, but because I'd like to know where it started, and maybe where it ends. He nodded, then said, Would you ever speak to her again? Not unless she came with her hands empty. No justifications, no stories, just herself. He understood. That night, before leaving, he left a small envelope on the table. What's this? Iris asked. My first design, he said. A concept sketch. From when I thought I'd build buildings, I called it the House of Return. It's not real, just lines, but it's something. She opened it after he left. The drawing was clean, sharp, a single room, one door, and a small window facing east. She placed it on the table, then opened her notebook and wrote, Some children inherit pain, some break it, and some draw their way out. The first sign was a car, parked half a block down from Ezekiel's house, engine off, windows tinted. It didn't move for 2 hours, then it was gone. The second sign was a stranger at the bookstore, middle-aged, well-dressed in that polished but forgettable way. Asked about employment records, said he was verifying references but didn't leave a card. Lorraine mentioned it the next morning while Iris was arranging a display of memoirs. Said he was from the city, she said, lowering her voice. But his questions were odd. Not about me, about you. Iris froze mid-reach, fingers grazing the spine of a hardcover. What did you tell him? Only that you were reliable, quiet, good with the dusting. I didn't say your last name. I don't think I even know it. Quote. Iris smiled softly, grateful. Later, when she told Ezekiel, he didn't ask if it was Beatrice. They both knew. I can disappear again, she said that night, sipping tea by the window. Ezekiel didn't look up from his whittling. You could, he said. I've done it before. He placed the small knife down, brushed wood shavings from his lap. But you didn't survive all this to vanish twice? She looked at him, heart quiet but firm. I'm not afraid of her anymore. No, he said. But she's afraid of you. That thought sat with Iris for a long time. Not out of pride, but because she had never considered herself a threat. She was a grandmother, a woman with thin wrists and stories in her spine. What could be so terrifying about a survivor? But maybe survival was the one thing some people couldn't forgive. That Sunday, Jasper arrived with a folder under his arm and a crease between his brows. She's hired someone, he said. Private, not official, but I recognized the voice when he called. He asked about the house, the deed, whether you ever had power of attorney over the property. Iris breathed in slowly. Why now? She asked. What does she want? I think she's afraid your story might come out. That I'll tell it. That you will. I haven't written it, Iris said. Not fully. Maybe you should. She considered that. What happens if I do? She asked. Then it's no longer hers to deny, Jasper replied. That night, Iris sat at the kitchen table long after the lights were off, her notebook open, pen hovering. She wrote one sentence. I was not buried. I was preserved. The next day, she went to the bookstore early and asked Lorraine if she could take a week off. Of course, Lorraine said. Everything okay? Iris nodded. I just need to write something down, before it disappears again. She spent the next 6 days in the lavender room. She didn't write like a victim. She didn't write like a warrior. She wrote like a woman who remembered. The weight of a silence no one else heard. The taste of water drunk in darkness. The way grief reshaped the voice until it no longer sounded like your own. And she wrote about Beatrice not as a villain, but as a girl once held too tightly by fear, who then held everyone else too tightly in return. She didn't excuse her, but she didn't erase her either. When she finished, the pages sat on the desk like something living. Ezekiel read them first. He didn't say much after. Only, it's not just a story, it's proof. Jasper offered to help her publish it under a pseudonym. She said no. If I'm going to be found, she said, let it be because I stepped forward, not because someone dragged me out. A week later, a letter arrived at the house, handwritten, Beatrice's name on the return label. Inside was a single sentence. You don't have to do this. No greeting. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a command disguised as concern. Iris folded the letter once, then set it in the fireplace. Watched it curl, turn black, and vanish. I know, she whispered. That's why I will. The community center smelled like old paint and weak coffee. It was a Wednesday morning. The kind where the sky was the color of dishwater and no one expected anything unusual to happen. A light rain fell, not enough to matter, just enough to make people keep their jackets on indoors. The event was called Voices from the Quiet, a weekly series hosted by a small local collective focused on memory, loss, and personal history. Ezekiel had found the flyer weeks ago, taped to the corkboard in the post office. He handed it to Iris without comment, only a small nod of encouragement. Now, here she was, seated in a metal chair, second row from the front, waiting for her name to be called. Not her old name. Not the one they had tried to bury, but the one she'd chosen, Iris May. She clutched the folded manuscript in her hands, the pages still warm from her touch. Around her, maybe 24 people milled about, sipping tea from paper cups, settling into seats, trading polite murmurs. No one knew who she was. Not yet. That was the point. A woman stepped up to the microphone. Today, she said, we're honored to welcome a writer who's asked simply to share a personal story. It's not published, not edited, just lived. She stepped back. Iris stood. Her knees cracked softly as she rose, and her palms trembled just enough to make her grateful for the printed page. She took her place at the mic, adjusted it down an inch, then looked out over the small crowd. A few polite smiles. A couple of bowed heads. Then, without apology, she began to read. I once lived in a house where I forgot the sound of my own voice. It didn't happen all at once. Silence moves slow, like roots under earth. You don't feel it until it starts to lift the floorboards. No one moved. The room shifted from passive to listening. She kept going. Not fast. Not theatrical. Just steady. Each sentence a thread pulled from a tapestry no one else had known existed. She told them of the wall. Of the months. Of the voice through brick that became her lifeline. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. She spoke of betrayal without venom. She spoke of survival without needing applause. She ended with a line that wasn't in the manuscript. I'm not here to accuse, she said. I'm here because someone once told me that truth deepens, and I want to know how deep mine can go before I forget who I am again. Then she stepped back. Silence again, but not like before. This one was full. Someone began to clap. Then another. And another. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it didn't have to be. When she returned to her seat, a woman beside her reached out and touched her hand. Thank you, she whispered. Iris smiled, surprised by the quiet ache in her chest. It wasn't pain. It was space. Room made where something had once been crushed. Later, when the event ended, a young man approached her. I know this isn't what it was about, he said nervously, but if you ever think of publishing it, I work with a small press. We help people tell stories that were almost lost. She nodded politely, accepted his card, and tucked it into her coat without promise. As she walked out into the drizzle, Jasper was waiting by the car. I listened, he said. From the back. You didn't come up. I didn't need to. They stood there for a moment, the sound of rain tapping softly on the hood. Then she asked, Do you think she'll hear it? Eventually, Jasper said. People always do, especially the ones who try hardest not to. Back home, Iris laid the manuscript on the kitchen table. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt still. And in that stillness, there was a kind of joy. A quiet one. The kind that grows roots. The story traveled quietly at first. Not through headlines or internet posts, just voices, one person told another over coffee. A woman who had sat 3 rows behind Iris at the reading mentioned it to her niece, who happened to write for the local newsletter. By the end of the week, a soft piece appeared online under the headline, "She Survived the Silence," an anonymous account from a woman who was never meant to speak again. It didn't name names, but truth doesn't always need labels. It just needs to echo. By Monday, the bookstore was busier than usual. Lorraine said nothing, but her smile lingered longer when Iris walked in. A customer paused beside her while she was shelving nonfiction. "I heard you read last week," the woman said. "It stayed with me." Iris nodded, murmured a quiet thank you, and returned to her work. But later that day, as she walked home, she saw it. A car she knew. The old sedan, forest green, with a dent above the left rear tire. Beatrice's, parked 1 street over, windows fogged from the chill. No one inside. Iris didn't stop. She kept walking, her steps even, her breath measured, but her heart was not still. That night, she told Ezekiel, "She's here." He set his coffee down carefully. "Has she said anything?" "Number. But she wants me to know she was." They sat in the quiet kitchen as the house creaked with evening. Ezekiel didn't speak, not at first. Then, softly, he said, "This was always part of the reckoning. I didn't expect it so soon. She doesn't control the pace anymore." Quote. That thought calmed her more than anything. The next morning, a letter was left at the bookstore's front desk. No return address. Inside, 3 words written in sharp black ink. "You wanted this." Iris read it without flinching, folded it once, slipped it into her coat pocket. Later that afternoon, Jasper appeared at the house. He didn't knock, just stepped inside like he had since he was 10, carrying a bag of groceries in one hand and a notebook in the other. "She called me," he said, placing the bag on the counter. "Said she's coming tomorrow. Wants to meet, alone." Iris looked at him. "Do you believe her?" He hesitated. "She's angry. But she's also scared. I think she realizes you've stepped out of her control. And she doesn't know who she is without that." "I'm not meeting her alone," Iris said. "You won't have to." Ezekiel, who had been sanding a broken drawer nearby, looked up. "I'll be here." The next day, the knock came at noon. It wasn't hesitant. Iris opened the door slowly. Beatrice stood on the porch. A heavy coat, sunglasses, scarf pulled tight at the neck. Not out of cold, out of protection. They hadn't seen each other in years. Still, Iris recognized her daughter immediately, not by the face, which had hardened, or the hands, which trembled slightly, but by the stance, defensive, always. "Can I come in?" Beatrice asked. Iris stepped aside without speaking. Ezekiel remained in the kitchen, within earshot but out of view. They sat at the small table in the front room, the one with uneven legs. Beatrice pulled off her sunglasses, revealing tired eyes. "I read the story," she said. "I thought you might. You didn't use names, but people know." "People always knew," Iris replied. "They just didn't believe it could happen." Beatrice leaned back, crossing her arms. "I didn't come for a fight." "Good, because I'm not offering one." Quote. There was a silence. Then Beatrice said, "Do you want me to apologize? I want you to tell the truth." Beatrice looked down. "I don't know how to start." Then try by not blaming the silence. That made her flinch. "I wasn't well," she said, softer now. "I was drowning in things I didn't know how to say, and Montgomery made it easier to ignore you than to face myself." Iris didn't reply. Because she already knew, and because that wasn't the part that mattered now. "You left me there," Iris said. "You walked away and didn't check if I was still breathing." Beatrice blinked hard once. "I thought if you disappeared, everything in me that was broken might go with you." "And did it?" Beatrice shook her head. "I only lost the one person who still saw me." The 2 women sat in the stillness of that truth. Not reconciled. Not redeemed. But facing each other without masks for the first time in years. Finally, Iris said, "This isn't a moment of healing. It's a moment of clarity. What comes next depends on you." "I don't know what that looks like." "Then live quietly," Iris said, not in hiding, but in honesty. Beatrice stood. Before she left, she asked, "Will you ever forgive me?" Iris looked at her long and full. I already did. That's the only reason I survived. Then she closed the door behind her daughter without locking it. Just closed. Gently. The day after Beatrice left, the house felt weightless. Not empty, just lighter. Like someone had opened a window after years of sealing it shut. The kind of stillness that didn't echo absence but invited breath. Iris stood by the sink, watching the steam rise from her teacup. Outside, the trees had thinned. Bare limbs reached toward the pale sky, but the wind didn't bite. It touched gently, like it too had grown tired of fighting. She hadn't cried. Not after the door closed. Not during the conversation. Not since. She thought maybe something in her had hardened, but it wasn't stone. It was steadiness. A kind she had never been taught, but had shaped from the silence itself. Ezekiel entered the kitchen, still tying the drawstring on his apron. He gave her a glance, half question, half check-in, but didn't speak. "I'm fine," she said before he could ask. "I figured," he replied, placing 2 slices of bread in the toaster. "You didn't sleep. I didn't need to." Again. He handed her the butter knife without a word. Later that morning, she returned to the bookstore. Lorraine hugged her. No words, just arms and warmth and time. The front display had changed. Her reading, recorded by someone in the audience, had been transcribed and printed on a small handout. At the bottom, in tiny italics, it read, "Story by Iris May. Used with permission." She stared at the table for a long time. Not out of fear, but out of wonder. How something once buried could sit so openly in daylight and not tremble. The customers didn't swarm her. No one asked for autographs or interviews, but people made room when she passed. Not as if she were fragile, but as if she were something newly made. At lunch, Jasper met her by the bench near the pond. He looked older than last month. Not tired, just more sure of himself. The way someone stands once they've chosen what side of the story they believe in. "She called again," he said. "Left a voicemail this time." Iris raised an eyebrow. "She asked me not to mention her anymore," Jasper added. "Said she needed space for healing." "Whatever that means." Iris nodded, then reached for the thermos he brought. "She'll write a version of events she can live with," she said. "We all do in the end." "And yours?" "I'm not rewriting mine." They sat in silence, sipping mint tea, letting the breeze move over them without urgency. "I've been thinking," Jasper said eventually, "about that house." She turned toward him. "I had the deed pulled. Turns out, part of it still names you. She never filed the final transfer. Maybe she thought it didn't matter once you were gone." Iris narrowed her eyes. "And what do you think I should do?" "It's yours," he said. "Take it, or burn it, or let it rot, but let it be your choice." That night, she returned to her room, the lavender one, and opened the sketch Jasper had once given her. The house of return. 1 room, 1 window, 1 door. She turned it over and began sketching something new. A house with 3 rooms, a garden, and an open gate. The next day she called a local contractor. Not to rebuild the old place, but to design something different. Modest, bright, close enough to town, but with quiet corners. When asked for the name on the application, she said clearly, "Iris May." And for the first time, it felt like a name not just chosen, but lived in. Jasper helped with paperwork. Ezekiel found furniture at auctions. Lorraine donated boxes of books for the reading corner. By winter, the small home stood on a narrow lot at the edge of the park. No plaque, no spotlight, just a mailbox painted by hand and a sign by the garden gate that read, "Still growing." On opening day, she invited no one formally, but they came anyway. Neighbors, friends, even strangers who had heard the story. They didn't come to celebrate survival. They came to witness a life continuing. Inside, she poured tea for whoever wanted it. She read a paragraph from her manuscript to a room full of folded chairs and quiet eyes. And at the end, she said simply, "I am not what was done to me. I am what I chose after." There was no applause. Only silence. The good kind. The kind made from peace. She didn't tell anyone she was going. Not Jasper. Not Ezekiel. Not even Lorraine, who asked the day before why she seemed more distant than usual. Iris simply rose early that morning, dressed in the soft sweater she'd worn during the worst winter inside the wall, and walked toward the past. The old house hadn't changed much. The shutters were cracked, the lawn yellowed to straw, and a gutter hung loose like a broken rib. But the structure remained, hollow, quiet, and watching as if it too remembered. She stood at the edge of the driveway for a long time before stepping forward. The key no longer worked, of course, but she didn't need it. The back door, the one near the kitchen, opened with a gentle push and a groan. The air inside was still thick with the scent of dust and something older than neglect. She didn't flinch. She passed the kitchen where she had once sliced apples for Jasper's lunchbox. Her fingers brushed the countertop, now stained and warped. She didn't linger. Down the hallway, the floorboards remembered her weight. The wallpaper had peeled in corners. Pictures once hung there, now gone. No frames, no hooks, just pale outlines of memory. She reached the room. The one with no windows. The one with the wall. She opened the door. It smelled of cement and old paint, but no decay, no rot, as if the space had been frozen the day she was pulled from it. The cot was still there, folded. The bulb had long burned out. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her. For a moment, she simply stood. Then she sat on the floor, cross-legged, back straight, and listened. There were no footsteps above, no distant voices, just silence. But the kind she had grown to know, the kind that didn't bind. She reached into her bag and pulled out a single item, a photograph. It was black and white, faded, taken the year she bought the house. She stood in the front yard, hair pinned high, holding Beatrice, age 8, who wore a crooked smile and held a stick like a sword. She placed the photo against the wall, not as a tribute, but as a reminder. This had happened. This had mattered. She pulled a candle from the same bag, set it beside the photograph, lit it with a match, then let it burn for 2 minutes before blowing it out. Then she stood, and with steady fingers, she pulled a small container of chalk from her coat pocket. On the inside of the door she wrote, "I left this room because I lived. Not loud. Not for others. Just for herself." When she stepped back into the hall, she didn't turn to look again. She walked to the front of the house and opened the old desk in the corner. Inside she left a sealed envelope. It contained no accusations, only a title deed. Signed over. Released. No strings. She didn't want the house. She wanted the freedom of having left it without bitterness. As she walked away, the wind picked up. A gust scattered brittle leaves across the porch. She didn't turn around. By the time she reached the sidewalk, her breath had steadied into something deeper than relief. It was completion. Not because everything had been fixed, but because not everything needed to be. That evening, back in the small garden behind her new home, Iris trimmed the dead blooms from her roses. Jasper watched from the porch. "You went back," he said. "I did. How did it feel?" "Quiet." "Did she know you were coming?" "Number." "And she won't." Quote. They sat in that dusk, neither needing more. Later, before going in for the night, Iris walked to the mailbox. There was one envelope inside. No return label. Just her name in firm, unfamiliar script. She opened it beneath the porch light. Inside, a single sheet. "Your story is not only yours. Others carry it now, like a lantern." She folded the note and placed it on the kitchen table. Then she went to bed and dreamed not of darkness, not of bricks or betrayal, but of light filtering through leaves, and a voice your own reading something soft into morning. It started with the garden. Not all at once. Just a few new shoots, a wild mint plant creeping between the bricks, a line of zinnias she hadn't planted but welcomed anyway. Iris knelt beside the soil most mornings now, hands dirty before breakfast. There was a comfort in coaxing something from the ground, in watching green stretch upward without apology. She had lived in silence for so long, then spoken. She had been hidden, then found. Now, for the first time, she was simply here, no longer surviving, just being. That shift was subtle but immense. Ezekiel noticed it first, the way her shoulders didn't stay tensed between sentences, how she left the porch light on without checking the window twice. Some evenings, she even left the curtains open. Lorraine brought over a donated bookshelf for the reading nook. Jasper helped her bolt it to the wall. They lined it with paperbacks and poetry and a single framed photo. A snapshot of the garden, taken at sunrise, a mist of gold rising behind the fence. Iris had written one word beneath it in pencil: beginnings. One afternoon, as she sat shelling peas by the window, a letter arrived. This one not anonymous, not vague. It was from the community college. An invitation. They'd read her story. Someone had passed it along. Would she be willing to guest speak in a women's studies seminar? Just one session. No pressure. She stared at the envelope longer than necessary. Jasper read it over her shoulder. "Will you go?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened her notebook and wrote, "Sometimes we become witnesses only because no one else survived to tell it." Then she looked up. "I might." Quote. He smiled. "I think they need to hear you. I think I need to hear me too." That night she practiced reading aloud again. Not for an audience. Just for herself. Her voice had changed. Not in pitch but in presence. It no longer sounded like a whisper waiting for permission. It sounded like a woman who had come back from the edge and planted her feet. The following week, a small package arrived. No name. Just a return address in a town she didn't recognize. Inside, a book. Hardcover. New. Its title, "The Name Under the Wall." Beneath that, the author's name. Not hers, but a dedication on the inside cover read, "To the woman whose silence became a map. Thank you for the path." She closed the book gently. Didn't cry. Didn't tremble. Just set it beside her tea and stared out the window for a long time. That evening she walked the garden path under fading light. Ezekiel sat on the porch, whittling. "You got a book in the mail," he said. "I did." Quote. "And?" "It's good," she said. "It's honest." He nodded. "You ever think about writing one of your own?" She looked down at her hands, still marked with soil, still hers. "I don't need to anymore," she said. "The story's not mine alone. It never was. But you were the first to tell it. I was the first to survive it." They sat together as night fell. In the quiet, Iris looked up and whispered, "Do you believe people like me ever get to feel whole again?" Ezekiel thought for a moment, then answered, "Maybe wholeness isn't about what's intact. Maybe it's about what still grows." She took that in slowly. The wind rustled the leaves above. Somewhere nearby, a screen door slammed, and a child's laughter floated across the street. Life didn't pause. And neither did she. The next morning, she accepted the college's invitation. She chose to read a short passage from her manuscript. Not the part about the wall, not the betrayal, but the line that came after all of it. "I am not here to be remembered as what was done to me. I am here to remember myself." And with that, she began to think not of what she'd lost, but of what she had yet to claim. The lecture hall smelled faintly of chalk and anxiety. Iris sat in the second row behind the podium while the professor introduced her. 23 students, most of them young women, leaned forward in their seats like this was something they hadn't expected to care about, but suddenly did. She wore a gray cardigan and the necklace Jasper had made for her birthday, a simple silver ring on a thread of leather. No script in hand, just a memory that had been practiced into presence. She stepped up to the microphone, cleared her throat, then began out at the beginning, but in the middle. "There's a moment," she said, "when you realize no one is coming to rescue you. And then, strangely, comes a second moment when you realize you don't need them to." No one moved. Not even the professor. She spoke for 18 minutes. Not about pain, not about survival, but about choice. She told them about how small decisions like whether or not to open the curtains could become declarations, about how remembering wasn't the same as reliving, and sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let something be true without demanding justice for it. Afterward, no one applauded right away. Then one student, quiet, maybe 20 years old, stood and clapped once. Others followed. The professor walked over, thanked her, invited her to come again. She smiled, said maybe, and stepped outside into the light. It was almost spring again. She hadn't noticed until now. Back home, the mailbox held a single envelope. No return address. Inside, a photo. A black and white image, printed from an old negative. 2 women. Young. Standing barefoot in a garden. Laughing. One of them held a wooden spoon like a microphone. The other had her hand raised like she was dancing. On the back, scribbled in faded ink, "We were happy here. Once." There was no signature. But Iris knew. Beatrice's handwriting was still unmistakable. She sat on the porch a long time that evening, photo in her lap, tea in hand. Jasper stopped by after dusk. "Everything okay?" he asked. She nodded. She remembered something good. "That's rare." "No," Iris said. "That's what lasts." They sat there, neither needing to say more, just watching the last light drain from the sky. Later that week, she placed a box at the edge of her garden gate. Inside were 4 items: the manuscript, a printed copy of her speech, the photo, and a note that read, "If you need this more than I do, take it, but only if you're ready." The next morning, the box was gone. She didn't check who took it. Didn't need to. Some truths don't belong to the teller anymore. They belong to the ones who carry them forward. That night, she dreamed of a door. Not closing. Opening. The door was left unlocked. She didn't realize it until morning, when she stepped out to water the herbs and saw it, ajar, just slightly, swaying with the wind. The garden gate, usually firm in its latch, was open too. Nothing was taken. Nothing broken. But something had shifted. Ezekiel came by later with bread. She didn't mention it. Neither did he. But she caught him scanning the corners, glancing down the road, lingering longer before leaving. That night, she sat on the porch in silence, the photo still in her lap. Beatrice and her, frozen in time, before things split down the middle, before cruelty wore a familiar face. Jasper arrived just after sunset. He stood at the edge of the steps, not climbing them. "She's gone," he said. "Where?" "No one knows. Her house is empty. The neighbors said a moving truck came 3 nights ago. She didn't say goodbye. She never does." He waited for a reaction. Iris only nodded. The days passed. The air thickened with late spring, heavy and slow. She found herself waking at odd hours, walking the house as if listening for something she couldn't name. One morning, a package arrived, wrapped in brown paper. No return address. Inside, a cassette tape, and a note. "You told your story. Now listen to mine." She stared at it for hours before putting it into Ezekiel's old player. The voice that came through was hers. Not her current voice. The old one. Young. Tired. Broken. A recording from inside the wall. She hadn't known it existed. It started with breath. Then whispers. Rambling. Prayers. Laughter that fractured halfway through. Silence stretching longer and longer between each sound. And then, a voice, not hers. Beatrice. Soft, controlled, practicing things she might say if ever confronted. "I know what you think I am, but I did it because I had to. You never understood the cost of loving something that reminds you of everything you hate about yourself." The tape clicked off. Iris didn't move for a long time. Then she rewound it, played it again, and again. That night, she wrote one sentence in her notebook. "Some ghosts knock. Others let themselves in." She didn't sleep. By morning, the front gate had been painted. Not by her. A single word, scrawled in dark red. "Still here." She didn't call the police. She didn't tell Jasper. Instead, she walked out to the garden, dug a small hole beneath the lavender, and buried the tape. Not to hide it, but to root it. Let the past compost itself. Let it feed something. If it dared. The next day, she gave a reading at the library. Her last. When asked by someone in the audience what justice looked like, she paused, then said, "It doesn't always arrive. Sometimes it forgets your address." The crowd was quiet. Afterward, she left through the back door. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't look over her shoulder. Back at the house, a second envelope was waiting. No name. Inside. A photo. Not of Iris. Not of Beatrice. A child, wide eyes, standing in front of a cement wall. There was no writing on the back. Just the outline of a hand, drawn in pencil, small, shaky, as if asking not to be remembered, but to be recognized. She placed the photo on her nightstand, turned off the light, and whispered, "I see you." Not a promise. Not a prayer. Just presence. Then, she closed her eyes and let the dark in not as a threat, but as a witness.